No, I don't know where exactly you stand on the Tea Party, but it seems to me that the Tea Party values are the values that the American right needs to adopt if it is ever to make a convincing case against the Democrats. And by that, I don't mean I'm with them on I'm with the moderates on social values. I mean, I think that America has moved on socially, and I think issues like maybe uh, freedom of choice, regarding abortion and stuff. These are issues that I think conservatives are going to have an increasing battle fighting. But I do think that conservatives shouldn't surrender on economics. And it seems to me that the Tea Party
Sure.
is very sensible here, that it understands that a small
Sure.
state is good state. Where,
Yeah.
I suppose we're back to this perennial question. How can the Conservatives ever win another election? What do they need to do? Over to you, Douglas.
Ah. Well, it would all be fine if people just listened to me. The problem is that there's a
That's
great.
it. But listen to
No,
Douglas
no,
Murray,
no,
that's it.
but,
Wow. I think
but
people are going to be really impressed with this. They're going to listen so closely now because you're about to tell us exactly how America can
yes.
restore its glory. Go on, over to you, Douglas.
Right. The first problem is people like Karl Rove being regarded as oracles. Oracles in ancient Greece, as now, got it wrong a lot of the time. They were unreliable. Sometimes they said things that were gnomic, which nobody understood, and which, in many cases, didn't come true anyway. We do not need oracles. We do not need this thing of individuals being regarded as being so brilliantly wonkish that they can deliver an election. It's almost always misguided. People get a reputation for having delivered an election if they were around at the time that an election is won. Then, as we saw this past election with the Republican Party, all of the oracles got it wrong. All of them got it wrong. Don't trust oracles. All you have to do is to do two things. You have to have a set of principles, and you also have to be, to some extent, able to negotiate. Now, you have to know what your principles are, and you have to know which bits of it that you're willing to soften a little bit here, strengthen a little bit there. But you have to know where you're coming from. You
Okay, tell
cannot
us
have
what
the
those principles
whole
are.
thing open for negotiation. You can't have it as the Marx Brothers had it. These are my principles, and if you don't like them, I've got others. That's
Yes, that was the Romney line, wasn't it? It really
yeah.
was.
These are the things which I am willing to fight for and die for, and if you don't like them, I've got another set in the background. That doesn't do. Voters distrusted, any human being distrusted. They want to know where you're coming from. But let's face it, coming on to the other bit, politics is about negotiation. You can't be in perpetual pursuit, as I think you sometimes are, James, of the most pure possible form of the good stuff.
That's
And
me.
that
I am
anything,
pure.
absolutely. And we need purists, but we also need people who can take the purists' ideas and do something with them to get into government. And the problem is that in recent years, conservatives in America and in Britain, in most of the Western world, have lost their ability to define their principles. And in the process, they have lost their principles. That is why we see people like, we had George Osborne, our Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK, he went to the most left-wing think tank a little while ago, and he said, I'm a passionately progressive figure. And it meant nothing. It meant absolutely nothing, other than people thought, I see, everything is up for negotiation. He should have turned up and said, this is what I believe in, these are conservative values, and I will explain why I think they are good for you, and we will try to persuade the country and get into power. But all of these geniuses and wonks in Britain and in America who keep on saying, I know how to get us into power, have you noticed they don't get us into power?
Okay, Douglas, let's cut to the chase here. What ground are you saying we should concede to the scumsuckers on the other side?
I think that far be it from me to tell American listeners,
You're the oracle,
but
dude.
let me give one example of it. The ideological purity argument on the right in the US seems to me to be continually being given hostages to fortune by the enemy. What I mean by this is, you saw, I'm sure, James, I'm sure a lot of the listeners did, Sandra Fluke stand up at the Democrat convention before the election and explain how basically the choice was between women's rights and the Republican Party, who would sort of stab all women immediately on election. This is how the left characterizes the right. Now, you and I know that that is not what the right in America any more than in Britain has. But you always find someone who will allow themselves to be dragged onto a decision, a personal opinion about, for instance, abortion, or about, for instance, homosexual rights and so on. I think we need to be completely clear about this. In the private sphere, people have all sorts of opinions. But the key thing for conservatives has to be, and this comes back to your Tea Party point, James, the key thing for conservatives has to be not to get caught in that mire again and again and again, but to get above it, to say these things are within the purview of decent opinion, but that's not what we're running on. We are not running, for goodness sake, on abortion. And the Republican Party didn't run on it last time, but they keep on getting stuck in it because the enemy sets traps for them. Yeah. Get above that and explain what your fiscal policy is. Explain what kind of society you want. Explain why the small state works. Explain why it is about freedom. Explain why it is about liberty. Don't allow your opposition to keep on making terrain which they lure you onto and you immediately get caught in their quicksand. That, unfortunately, is the problem. Conservatives on both sides of the Atlantic have lost the ability to dictate the conservative argument.
Yes. Well, Douglas, you make out like I'm one of those people that would oppose that line. You talk about my ideological purity, but my ideological purity begins and ends in my belief in liberty and the small state.
Absolutely. No, I'm not knocking ideological purity, James. Ideological purity is absolutely vital for a certain proportion of the right. It's not very much use, you notice, for anyone once they're in office, other than to have the backbone that it provides. It provides you the backbone. It helps you to know where you will not go. That is absolutely crucial.
Right.
But politics is about negotiation. You need an absolutely pure ideology at some place. It's like the monastery in the Middle Ages. There has to be a place you can go for the learning. There has to be a place you go for the deep thought. But this is about purity and pragmatism. And I just don't like the fact that so much of our politics is now run by pragmatics. I wouldn't particularly like if it was run purely by purists either, but it seems to be run by pragmatics at the moment. And I think this is fatal because it involves people who spend their days looking at opinion polls saying, if you only reach out to, Pebble Dash woman in the middle parts of the city of X, you'll get to power. And I mean, yes. I don't know how many years I've listened to these ones. And we have Pebble Dash man and Karaoke Kid and, oh God, I don't know, people who drive their spouse to work on every other Wednesday. Yeah, it's a night. They all want to chase these particular things. They just have to come back to the point. Why do they want power? What would they do with it? And then explain it to people.
Well, I think that is very wise, Douglas. I think you have now won the Conservatives the next election. Just so long as they listen to this show, they should repeat it and repeat it and repeat it.